You all have started reading it. I have. It's incredible. Daybreak, Undoing the Imperial Presidency and Forming a More Perfect Union. You all know David from After Downing Street. He doesn't really need an introduction, but he is a wonderful man, and he gets the word out, and he shows up. And that's what we all need to do. Thank you, David. David is here. David Swanson.
Thanks, Laurie. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Wonderful bunch of people. Can you imagine the outcries of national shame from liberal commentators if George W. Bush had accepted a peace prize by advocating for war and announcing his right to launch aggressive wars? What an embarrassment that would have been.
That's right.
Totally. But Bush would have made such a speech with fewer troops in the field, fewer mercenaries in the field, a smaller war budget, a smaller military budget, bases in fewer nations, the imperial powers of the presidency less firmly established, and of course, worse pronunciation. And isn't that what matters? The current president is smart and belongs to a different party. So when he continues and escalates wars we despised, wars we made great sacrifices to try to end, well, either the wars must be better than we thought, or escalating them must be really the super smart way to end them. After all, the other warmongering party calls the president a foreign-born socialist traitor. Except that they loved his speech in Oslo.
Yeah, they did.
One reason that President Obama believes he can claim the power to launch wars is that Bush's lawyers produced on October 23rd, 2002, a memo proclaiming that presidents have that power. And do you know what their central argument was? Bill Clinton did it. Bill Clinton launched minor attacks on Iraq and other parts of the world, not to mention the former Yugoslavia, and so therefore Bush had the right to do the same thing on a larger scale. In right-wing rhetoric, Clinton was another socialistic traitor. In legal arguments, he was the justification for Bush's crimes. It's the same deal with President Obama. In the surface-level charade of partisan bickering, he's a socialist, a term applied without any particular meaning to it. But underneath, his efforts to protect the criminals who preceded him and to continue their crimes are honored and appreciated.
That's right.
Is Obama a war president?
Yes!
Is the Pope Catholic? Because we have allowed presidents the power of war, the term war president is going to be redundant from here on out. Presidents gain powers through wars. Presidents love wars. I don't mean that President Obama has no choice. He could defy expectations. He could refuse to be corrupted. He could do what he is legally and morally required to do. If you imagine such things are impossible, I refer you to Congressman Dennis Kucinich and former Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney. It can be done. But we have gone 2¼ centuries without presidents readily answering the demands of the public. And this republic has lasted this long in large part because the public has compelled the Congress to restrain the presidents. I hate to say this, but I'm not against escalating a war. I'm against continuing these wars at all. And I don't want a president to end an escalation or a war. I want the House of Representatives to deny this president the money. But our representatives are largely bought and paid for. They're terrified of the corporate media. They're servants of party bosses. Their corruption is the primary reason that millions of people fantasize about lobbying a president. Sometimes we like to think as well that pressuring Congress to do its job, even through the most aggressive, nonviolent resistance, somehow constitutes naive faith in a system, whereas pleading with the emperor is true populism. You know, the people who wrote the Constitution got a lot of things wrong, but they were ahead of us on this one. They knew that we could never have peace if a single individual was given the power of war. We must put the power of peace back in the Congress and force the House of Representatives to use it. They have a final vote next week on a war funding bill. They need to vote no. But do you know what they're going to do to try to pass it? They're going to put unemployment insurance in a war funding bill. When it's not relief for victims of hurricanes, when it's not education for veterans, pretty soon it's going to be kittens for children. Now it's unemployment insurance as the lipstick on this pig of a bill that creates unemployment in the first place. Investing money in wars creates fewer jobs than cutting taxes, and cutting taxes creates fewer jobs than investing in education, in mass transit, in infrastructure, in construction, in any non-violent industry. Every dollar for war is a dollar less for jobs. Congress members are absolutely aware that they can vote no on a whole package until the war money is taken out and the unemployment insurance is left in. And you know that you can force them to do it now and in the coming weeks and in the coming months. You know that much more difficult things have been done. You know that it is far more enjoyable to engage in this struggle, even in the cold, than to sit at home and complain. And you know that the time is rapidly coming when we must do what any civilized nation would have long since done and non-violently shut this town down.
Thank you to Laurie Dobson and the other organizers who pulled today's event together. I think we all recognize that there's a dramatic shift taking place in public opinion. That would be natural given what's happened at the governmental level with the war in Afghanistan. Today, 11 months after George W. Bush left office, and I don't know how many were here for the inauguration, but moments before Barack Obama took the oath of office, there was the ceremonial last flight where Bush had to get into the helicopter and fly away. And when he did that, it would be hard to describe the sentiment on the ground. There were millions of people cheering, exhilarated, euphoric. It was something to behold, because they felt that not only was Bush leaving, the war criminal Bush was leaving, but this was indeed the beginning of a new era, a new period. The excitement and enthusiasm from that election campaign would have a transformative character on U.S. policy. So we have, in a way, a very important real-life experience that we, the people of this country, have gone through in the last 11 months. Bush is gone. And if the argument is always, well, at least Barack Obama is not Bush, which is true, we can't get very far. But it's really not about the personality and the person who occupies the White House. The fact of the matter is, today, sisters and brothers, there are more troops occupying Iraq and Afghanistan combined than at any time during the past 8 years. That's a fact. When President Obama came in, he ordered 30,000 troops more to Afghanistan. And the U.S. war effort continued to deteriorate. And Stanley McChrystal said it very plainly: if allowed to continue, this war will be lost. And so President Obama has now agreed with the generals to send another 30,000 troops. But let's think about that. If they are losing with 100,000 troops, will 30,000 troops really make a difference? Is that why they're being sent? Is it a way to turn the tide? I mean, the fact of the matter is, President Obama and Stanley McChrystal and Petraeus know that the war in Afghanistan can never be won, because the people in Afghanistan will never be colonial slaves, and they will fight and fight and fight. The fact is, there are not just the Taliban in Afghanistan. There are 140 armed insurgent groups representing little villages and large regions, and they're bound together by this denominator. They will never, ever let their homes and villages be occupied and dictated to by Western, U.S. and NATO military forces, and they will, as the Vietnamese did, resist until the end, and that's why they will win, and that's why the United States military will be defeated.
All right!
So, if the leaders know that the war can't be won, why are they sending more troops? Because like Nixon and Kissinger, they don't want to take responsibility for a military defeat or the perception of a military defeat. That's the real reason those troops are going. They're going to send thousands more young people to their graves, Afghans and Americans, so the political leaders can avoid taking responsibility for a war that should never have been waged and should be ended not 2 years or 5 years from now, but right now. I urge all of you to join with us and hundreds of organizations, and there are, by the way, sisters and brothers, 600 groups now that are uniting to bring tens of thousands of people to Washington, D.C. on Saturday, March 20th. Will you be there? Will you bring your friends? Will you bring your neighbors? Will we make it clear that this movement will grow and grow as it did in Vietnam? And ultimately, it will be the people, not the elected officials, who will bring this imperialist invasion to an end. Thank you very much.
Brilliant back Air Action Coalition. Thank you. You be there. His song now is going to be, it's called Listen, and this song is what we need to hear inside ourselves so we know what to do next. Jordan Page.
How's everybody doing? Are you guys cold? No? Good. What's that?
That's better.
All right, look at all you patriotic Americans. Bunch of troublemakers, if you ask me. I'm right there with you. All right, here we go. I wrote this song in opposition to interventionist military policy. I hope this speaks to you. This is called Listen. Rising out from the heart of America, America. Listen to the sound of the drum calling players to the game of the new world order. Don't be caught unaware when the heads start rolling. No, it couldn't happen here. I know it wouldn't happen here. But I will not submit to authority of man. I'm alive, I'm awake. This is more than I can take. If you had an open door, would you kill a little more? Listen to the cries of the didn't happen here. I know it never happened here. But I will not submit to authority of man. I'm alive, I'm awake. This is more than I can take. If you had an open door, would you kill a little more? There's a war machine in motion, and the bullets fall like rain, and the light in the eyes of the innocent has faded into pain. Yesterday I knew this world was spinning toward the end, but today I see the wasteland, and it's too late to pretend. Listen to the words that you hear, said the ghost of Vietnam through a veil of napalm. Don't forget your mistakes and where you came from. Authority of man, I'm ready to die, but not for a lie. See the signs appear, it's gonna happen here.
Well, the first thing I want to say is how much I love you. You lift my heart today because you remind me that a more compassionate, just, and peaceful world is possible. You remind me that there is hope for the change we want, but we know that our work is far from over. Obama didn't really announce a surge. He wants us to believe that his surge is a short-term spike just to clean things up. It's not. What he announced was an escalation of the war, an expansion of the war, a deepening of our military and financial involvement. We are committing more souls and treasure to an already failed strategy and tragedy. He's creating a situation that in 12 months we will be told is too big to fail. The sad truth most of us understand is that more violence, more guns, more death, more destruction is failure.
Right.
Failure of our politicians, failure of our diplomacy, failure of our military, failure of our economy, failure of their leadership. The work ahead for us is in our communities. We must bring more people into our movement. We must remind our fellow Americans that there is a link between our military misadventures abroad and the defunding of our essential needs at home.
Yes.
A year ago, the people sent a clear message to our elected officials. Defund wars, financial bankruptcy? I, for one, refuse to wait and see. President Obama will need to find money for these wars, and soon. And we say to him, not another dime, not another dollar.
Not another dime.
Not another dollar! Not another dime! Not another dollar!
Not another dollar.
Now is the time to educate, to strategize, to mobilize coalitions across the country. Our cities and states can't meet their budgets, and the people are feeling the pain. We need to remind them to demand that our leaders stop squandering our resources for war, and instead fund education, healthcare, affordable housing, and jobs. We must make these links, and we must act. It's the pressure from the people that changes policies, not politicians. President Obama, war is not the solution. It is the problem. We say no escalation, end the wars, bring our troops home now and take care of them when they get here. Thank you. Keep the faith in each other. We are the true power.
Well, good afternoon. How can we find enough words to thank the people who brought us together today to remember those three virtues we love: courage and wisdom and love. And we heard that coming forth from elected representatives and former elected representatives. And we're grateful, and we know how to say thank you. But we also know that U.S. leaders of late who have the international stage, the international forum, have neglected two vital words. We're sorry.
That's right.
We're so very sorry for the wreckage, the bloodshed, the despair caused by our menacing warlike culture, and we don't want to be collaborators anymore. We want our sorrow, we want our tears to nurture every step toward change. You hear in the media that we're a war-weary public. You think we're war-weary. May I remind myself and you what it was like when I was in Gaza and the bombs were falling during Operation Cast Lead once every 11 minutes. The planes that the U.S. supplied, the fuel that came free of charge, bombed Gazan civilians. I don't know anything about militarism. Even I could tell, oh, that was an Apache helicopter flying overhead and dropping a Hellfire missile. And that was a 500-pound bomb dropped by an F-16 plane. In Afghanistan, people who fled their homes, who are living out in remote mountainous places. People in Waziristan who don't have food for their children because of military offensives that we've pushed the Pakistan government to wage. These people know what it's like to be war-weary. And the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, when he gave his Beyond Vietnam speech, he wasn't trying to be cooperative with the public relations people in his messaging. He came right out and said, we must love the Viet Cong. Well, let's update it. I'll say it. We must love Al-Qaeda. We must love the Taliban. And the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King told us how. He said, try to understand the humanity of your adversary. How do we understand the humanity? Try to understand poverty. The people that are ripe to join the Taliban have been afflicted by horrendous poverty. They don't want to send their children to bed hungry at night. They don't want to cower under our bombs. And we don't want to be a menacing military power. How can we change? We must feel the sorrow of our wars. Don't let our hearts be covered with sheets of ice. Say the words, we're sorry, and then remember, Congress shall make no law to abridge the right of people to assemble peaceably for the redress of grievance. We have a grievance. Get inside your elected representatives' offices, assemble peaceably, tell them you cannot be a collaborator.
Right.
Tell them we don't want menacing military might to represent us around the world. If you want to counter terror, build justice. And we want to be about that building. We want to be guided by the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who said that our neighbors are people beyond our own neighborhood, our tribe, our race. Our neighbors are all over the world, and Thomas Paine said it well. My country is the world. My religion is to do good. And it's good to do that together with you. Thank you.
Going to jail for refusing to pay his taxes during the Mexican-American War. A minority is powerless when it conforms to the majority. It is not even a minority then, but it is irresistible when it clogs by its whole weight. If the alternative is to keep all just men in prison or give up war and slavery, the state will not hesitate what to choose. If 1,000 men were not to pay their tax bills this year, that would not be a violent and bloody measure, as it would be to pay them and enable the state to commit violence and shed innocent blood. Those who recognize the injustice of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as Iran, who concede that these wars are not only a violation of international law, but under post-Nuremberg laws are defined as criminal wars of aggression, yet continue to support a Democratic Party that supports these wars, have forfeited their rights as citizens. By allowing the status quo to go unchallenged, they become agents of injustice.
Yes.
To do nothing is to do something, and they practice a faux morality. They take refuge in the conception of themselves as moderates. They stand on what they insist is the middle ground without realizing that the middle ground has shifted under us, that the old paradigm of left and right, liberal and conservative is meaningless in a world where, to quote Immanuel Kant, we live in a time of radical evil. Nothing has changed for Muslims in the Middle East under the Obama administration. The wars of occupation go on or have expanded. Israel continues to flout international law, gobbling up more Palestinian land and carrying out egregious war crimes in Gaza. Calcified, repressive regimes in countries such as Egypt and Saudi Arabia are feted in Washington as allies, and Muslim rage is stoked because we station tens of thousands of American troops on Muslim soil, occupy 2 Muslim nations, and do nothing to halt the illegal Israeli occupation of Palestine. The Muslim world fears correctly that we intend to dominate Middle East oil supplies and any Caspian Sea oil infrastructure, and it does not want our protestations of goodwill, but they want the elemental right of justice and freedom from foreign occupation, and we would react should the situation be reversed no differently. The brutal reality of expanding foreign occupation and the harsher and harsher forms of control are the real tinder of Islamic fundamentalism, insurgencies, and terrorism. We can try and blame the violence on the clash of civilizations. We can naively tell ourselves that we are envied for our freedoms. We can point to the Quran. But these are fantasies that divert us from facing the central dispute between us and the Muslim world, from facing responsibility for the virus of chaos and violence spreading throughout the Middle East. We can have peace if we shut down our network of military bases, stay the hand of Israel to create a Palestinian state and go home, or we can have long, costly, and ultimately futile regional war. There is a direct correlation between our permanent war economy and the mounting foreclosures, unemployment, and collapse of our civil society.
That's right.
We cannot single out any national institutions anymore that can accurately be described as democratic. Surely not the highly manipulated, money-saturated elections, the lobby-infested Congress, the imperial presidency, the class-biased judicial and penal system, and least of all, the media. Athenian democracy collapsed, Thucydides wrote, because of Athens' expanding empire. Athens became a tyrant abroad, and then a tyrant at home. The tyranny Athens imposed on others, it finally imposed on itself. And those who caution prudence and moderation, who remain within the grip of the Democratic Party, abet the crimes committed in our name and the snuffing out of our open society. I must confess that over the past few years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate, King wrote from another era as he sat in a Birmingham jail. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in his strive toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. And this lukewarm acceptance, this failure to act, is the worst form of moral cowardice. It cripples and destroys. When Dante enters the city of woes in the Inferno, he hears the cries of those whose lives earned neither honor nor bad fame, those rejected by heaven and hell, those who dedicated their lives solely to the pursuit of happiness. They are all the good people, the ones who never made a fuss, who filled their lives with vain and empty pursuits, harmless, no doubt, to amuse themselves, and who never took a stand for anything, never risked anything, who went along. They never looked too hard at their lives, never felt the need, never wanted to look. The philosopher Theodor Adorno wrote that this exclusive preoccupation with personal concerns and indifference to the suffering of others beyond the self-identified group is what made fascism and finally the Holocaust possible. It is we who are guilty for sending these young men and women to wars that did not have to be fought. It is we who are guilty for turning away from the truth of war to wallow in a self-aggrandizing myth. Guilty because we create and decorate killers when they come home, maimed and broken, and discard them. We face a crisis. Our democratic institutions are being ruthlessly dismantled by the corporate state. We have embarked on a program of perpetual war, and we are paralyzed by fear. To resist, while there's still time, is not only the highest form of spirituality, but the highest form of patriotism. It is, if you care about what is worth protecting in this country, a moral imperative.
Yes.
As Immanuel Kant, moral autonomy is possible only through reflection, self-determination, and finally the courage not to cooperate. There are hundreds of thousands who have died in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the number would be dwarfed by a war with Iran. Not a lot is being asked of us. Compare our potential sacrifices with what is being inflicted on and demanded of those trapped in the cauldrons of violence in Iraq, Afghanistan, and soon perhaps Iran. Courage, as Aristotle wrote, is the highest of human virtues, because without it, we are unlikely to practice any other virtue. And once we find courage, the courage not to cooperate with these systems of power,
we find freedom. Thank you.
Constitutional avenues of reflecting their sovereignty, as is in the preamble to the Constitution, we the people. Notice, you cannot use the courts to challenge criminal illegality abroad by our government officials and their corporate contractors, because the judges will say, you have no standing to sue, you can't get into the court to even plead your case, and besides, these are political questions outside the federal court's jurisdiction. So the courts are blocked. Number two, you can't use the Congress because a majority of the Congress rolls over for the executive branch, as they have been increasingly violating their own oath of office to represent their constitutional authority to declare war or not to declare war. There are some, as you know, there are some members of Congress who are stand up, like Dennis Kucinich, John Conyers, and others, but they are still a minority, and we owe it to them to support them very strongly back home. Now, because what they're going to start to do is what Congress did in the 1970s when Nixon was president. They cut off funds for continuing the war in Vietnam and provided funds for bringing our soldiers back. That's the authority Congress has to stop this expanding military disaster in Afghanistan spilling over into Pakistan. Now let's see, what kind of access do we have to the White House? That's the third branch of government. Do any of us have access to the White House? You know who has access to the White House? The CEO bosses of Aetna, the CEO bosses of the drug companies, of the munitions corporations, of what Eisenhower warned us about in his farewell address, the CEOs who run the military-industrial complex. They get invited to the White House, they meet with the White House, but the people who elected Barack Obama, they are persona non grata. So we are blocked from all three branches of government. How about the media? Now check this out. FAIR, the organization FAIR, writing in the magazine Extra, analyzed the op-ed pages of the New York Times and Washington Post from January to October 30th this year. In the Washington Post alone, 61 out of 67 op-eds supported continuation of the war in Afghanistan. And this is supposed to be a liberal paper. So basically, the voice of a majority of people in this country, many retired military, diplomatic, and national security officials, the voice of many academics who have studied this problem over there, are shut out, essentially shut out of the media. And you can imagine what the national TV news is all about. Now, there is the question here of finding the people who have great credibility because they come from the military and the diplomats and the national security. And it's quite interesting to note that you are able to use the statements of many prominent people, which I haven't found being used too much in the anti-war literature. For example, Matthew Hull, this captain, combat captain, stated, and he was over there, and he was right in the middle of it as a Foreign Service officer. He said, quote, "The bulk of the insurgency fights against the presence of foreign soldiers and taxes imposed by an unrepresented, corrupt government in Kabul." In other words, why are we over there? Obama says we want to destroy Al-Qaeda. But his own national security advisor says there's at the most 100 Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And they have no base, no artillery, no army, no navy, nothing. They can't attack the Allies or the U.S. military, according to Jim Jones, right here at the White House, the national security advisor. So who are we fighting? Well, now Obama says we're fighting the Taliban, and he stereotypes the Taliban as if they're all engaged in supporting Al-Qaeda, which is, of course, not true. And what we're seeing here is the natural resistance movement to foreign occupation, something that we would do with great energy if foreigners occupied our soil. There's also George Bush and Barack Obama, a seamless transition when it comes to Afghanistan and Iraq. Now, what we have to ask ourselves, we have to ask, and by the way, do you know what this war is costing in a micro sense? Listen to this. You know what a gallon of gasoline delivered to the mountains of eastern Afghanistan to our soldiers is costing the taxpayer? $400 a gallon. $400 a gallon. Now,
Who's profiting?
Yes. Now, another thing that's important to note here is the statement by a very respected former CIA guy who's been speaking out here, and basically what he says is that the resistance in Afghanistan is a resistance against foreign occupation. That to the extent they're supporting the Taliban fighters is because they're the only effective fighters in the country. The other thing that Obama doesn't clarify with all his reputed intelligence is that the Afghan army is made up of northern tribes, Uzbeks and Tajiks, who are loathed by the southern and southeastern giant tribe Pashtuns, which are made up of 40 million people. So you have intertribal conflict, which is stimulated dramatically by the foreign occupation. Now, what do we do here? Well, one, we have to say that the escalation in Afghanistan is fueling the insurgency. So you don't want to put gasoline on fire. You want to withdraw the fighters, and you want to represent the best hand of the United States, having destroyed so much of that country, which is what Ashraf Ghani, the former finance minister, the honest finance minister of Afghanistan, former president of Kabul University, former professor of anthropology in the U.S., said concrete justice. Concrete justice is working with the tribal leaders and give them a stake and providing for their people, and it's much cheaper than having soldiers at $1 million a year there, providing people with jobs, agriculture, schools, clinics, highways, all the things that are needed for a decent livelihood. That is what will end the kind of conflict that we are expanding in terms of more and more soldiers. Now, Obama hasn't talked much about negotiations, but the untold secret in Afghanistan is that the British, the Dutch, the French, and the U.S. have been in direct contact with various groups of Taliban. Been in direct contact with. You see, if they tell you that, they will break the stereotype of characterizing the Taliban as just a bunch of terrorists. But they have been in direct contact, and the British, for example, want direct negotiations, and the French want direct negotiations, as has been the case in some quarters in the U.S. Now, Obama believes that people of your persuasion, namely the majority of the American people, have nowhere to go politically. That's why he can ignore us. And of course, the answer has to be, that in the congressional elections of 2010, people do have where to go. They can go for third-party candidates, or they can stay home. And just let me end on this note. Remember, our ambassador to Afghanistan sent cables to the State Department a few weeks ago saying, don't send more soldiers because the Afghan government is not really a government. It's unstable and it's corrupt and it doesn't deliver services, etc. Well, you notice how Ambassador Eikenberry testified the other day? They brought him right back into the fold. But that didn't deny his candid appraisal there, and he's a former general to boot. Now, remember 1994, when a lot of Democrats and a lot of liberals stayed home. Gingrich toppled the Democrats in Congress and took control of Congress in January 1995. That can happen again if Obama continues his reckless path toward a criminal war of aggression that is undermining our national security, our national reputation, and destroying on both sides of the ocean millions of innocent people's lives, health, safety, and hopes for the future. Thank you very much.
I want us to show a little love for Dennis Kucinich for being out here with us. Thank you so much, Dennis and Elizabeth. Millions of us are drinking dirty and contaminated water. 4 million of us will get foreclosure notices by the end of this year. 25 million of us are or underemployed. 47 million of us have no health insurance. And millions more are underinsured. My aunt was killed by the healthcare system in this country. Not because she didn't have insurance, she did. What she didn't get was quality care. And amid all the talk about health care, no one is talking about quality care. My cousin, who is no more than 24 years old, is now $100,000 in debt because she wanted to get an undergraduate college education. But the trials of my family are not our story alone. Millions of us are now in the same boat. And no matter how hard we wish for a better world and a kinder country, our policymakers are not delivering on our hopes and dreams. In fact, the dreams of our country stand deferred and drowned in debt. Sadly, in the face of growing income inequality, our president chose to transfer over $23 trillion of our hard-earned money to the bankers and financial elite, who didn't have to work hard at all for it, just tank our economy. So huddled in fear, we pray together that the flu, a hurricane, the Great Depression, or the next terrorist attack doesn't hit us. Now, given all these problems, what do our leaders do? Bomb, maim, and kill people on the other side of the planet whose resources certain powerful people in this country want to steal and whose territory occupies the land necessary for global conquest. Instead of investigating war criminals in the Bush administration, President Obama has chosen to become one. Our president is now complicit in torture, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes against the peace. So what are we to do? We will not give up and we will not go away. We are not so demoralized that we can't see the truth. We know that lies are not truth, ignorance is not strength, and war is not peace. We see the power of the ballot in Latin America, where voters in unrigged elections are choosing freedom. Our freedom is under siege as much right here as it is in Haiti or Honduras. If U.S. politics was truly democratic, then we would not have war. That's why I support Senator Gravel's National Initiative Project. Who has $100 million of their own money to spend to get elected, like New York's mayor did? We are ready to act on our dreams, to create the kind of change that graduates students from college free of charge, that treats medical ailments free of charge, that reflects our interests, not the special interests, that elects peace candidates to Congress, and that elects a peace president too. While our fellow Americans are afraid to get sick, struggle to keep a job, educate their children, stave off foreclosure, and make ends meet, we will not rest. As long as bombs drop and civilians die, we will not rest. While the oligarchs and the war machine get our money, we will not rest. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. lamented that both political parties failed to take a stand for what was right. He said that our scientific power had outstripped our spiritual power, that we possessed guided missiles and misguided men. Well, President Obama, don't be misguided.
Stop shielding war criminals from justice in our courts. Stop supporting the Patriot Act and spying against us environmentalists and peace activists. Stop granting power to the Federal Reserve. Close Guantanamo. Stop torture and rendition. Secret prisons and building military bases all over the planet. President Obama, stop the saber rattling at Iran. Stop the drones and depleted uranium. Stop bombing Somalia. Stop using war as an energy policy. And finally, stop bankrupting our nation. We will not stop. We will not rest. And our peace candidates will win.
Thank you very much. I want to first begin by introducing my wife, Elizabeth. Where are you? I know you're here somewhere. Elizabeth? Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth, for your support in all this. And it's great to be here with Cynthia McKinney. Let's hear it for Cynthia, whom I had the pleasure of serving with in the United States Congress. It's a beautiful day here to claim the beautiful power of the people, to challenge our government when we feel that our government has gone in the wrong direction. These wars are corrupting the heart of our nation.
That's right.
They raise serious questions about the legitimacy of the two-party system.
Yes, indeed.
This coming week, Congress will fold unemployment compensation into a bill which will provide $130 billion to keep the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq going. The message is clear. We have money for war, but not for jobs. Money for war, but not for health care. Money for war, but not for education. Money for war, but not for housing. Money for war, but not for peace. Billions for bailouts, bonuses, and bombs. Where is our security when 10 million people will lose their homes in the next year? Where is our security when there are 15 million Americans out of work? Where is our security when 47 million Americans go to bed every night hungry? Where is our security where 47 million Americans do not have health care? We are nation building in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, and some would have us nation build even in Iran. But we cannot nation build here at home, where bridges, water systems, sewer systems, and roads are falling apart.
That's right.
We must rally across America to set aright our nation's priorities. We must rally, protest, march, to exercise our civic capacity to bring about real change. Congress must take responsibility. I will soon introduce two bills invoking the War Powers Act, which will force votes on withdrawal from Afghanistan and Pakistan. The decision to go to war is not the President's alone to make. That the Constitution places on Congress, under Article 1, Section 8, the ultimate responsibility. And we must insist that Congress take the responsibility whenever the President does not. Congress must stop funding these wars. Congress must demand a withdrawal from the wars. Congress must pass legislation to put millions back to work. Congress must pass legislation to provide health care for all. Congress must restrain this administration's impulse to use armed force to achieve a false sense of security. We have a right to defend ourselves, to be sure. But we must not confuse defense with offense. This Thursday, our president mused about the inevitability of war, war's instrumentality in the pursuit of peace, and just wars. It is important for us to reflect on his words, because once we believe in the inevitability of war, war becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
That's right.
Once we are committed to war's instrumentality in the pursuit of peace, we begin the Orwellian journey to a semantic netherworld where war is peace, where momentum of war overwhelms hopes for peace. And once we wrap doctrines perpetuating war in the arms of justice, we can easily legitimate the wholesale slaughter of innocents. The war in Iraq was based on lies. Wars in Afghanistan and Pakistan are based on flawed doctrines of counterinsurgency. War is often not just, sometimes just war. And our ability to rethink the terms of our existence, to explore the possibility of peace, peace without war, may well determine whether we end war or war ends us. So let us gather in town squares, in parks, in villages, in colleges, in labor halls, to demand that we reset the priorities of our nation, to demand that we rally America to build our nation anew at home, to demand that we restore our nation to peace and prosperity. They are indivisible. They together will lead us to a new era, and your efforts will be an important part of that. Thank you very much.